What is a variation in construction? In this video, we'll look at what a variation is, why it's so important to understand, scope creep, how a variation is defined in the contract, and the impact of wide scope and onerous terms. So what is a variation? Put simply, a variation is a change from the scope of work that was initially specified in the construction contract. Therefore, having a clear project scope incorporated into the contract to begin with will make recognizing variations much easier. This is why we have another video that is all about defining project scope. Why is this important to understand? Like any commercial arrangement, it's all down to the money. A construction contract will define a project scope. The contract should also include a contract sum, which is the price to complete the defined scope. So as the contract scope changes, the contract sum should also change with it. The project price should align with the project scope. The project scope can increase or decrease, but typically the project scope tends to increase. As a contractor, you'll want to avoid this, where the project scope is increasing but the project price is staying the same. This can happen when you're not on top of the variations. This can happen gradually. Lots of small things can add up, and this is often called scope creep. So how do you spot variations? We've already said that a variation is a change to the initial project scope. You will want to check your contract to see what that states is a variation. Identifying a variation will change depending on the type of contract being used and the project scope identified within the contract. If you have a wide scope of work or onerous terms that minimize the possibility of variations being claimed, then you may not have a variation under the contract. This is a good point to drop a reminder that contracts are all about agreements. It's not just about what is fair. If you have signed an enforceable agreement, then that agreement is what counts. This is why it is important to undertake a contract review prior to signing any contract. You want to avoid signing a contract that includes a very wide scope or onerous terms. Let's look at an example with a contract with a wide scope. Design and build contracts may have quite a wide scope. This isn't always the case, but it can be. Under a design and build contract, the client will typically list employer requirements, and providing that the contractor's proposals fit inside this criteria, then there is some flexibility to how these can be met. Issues can arise when a detailed design is not incorporated into the contract and is still being developed when works start. It can become difficult to identify if design changes fall within or outside of the employer's requirements. Whether or not a variation exists then becomes the argument. Your contract could include onerous terms. These are typically terms that pass on too much risk from one party to another. And in construction, these will attempt to minimize the opportunity for a contractor to claim a variation. Here is a snippet from a contract review I have undertaken for a client. We asked this one to be removed. My client was a subcontractor in the civils industry. They were issued a contract with onerous terms. This term states that any special requirements dictated by utility providers would need to be complied with, but my client would not be able to claim for any additional time or money. It also states that there could be no claim whatsoever if the information provided to them was wrong. The inclusion of this term was a clear attempt to remove the ability for my client to raise a variation. It is a broad term and covers a lot of unknowns, so we had to reject it. We also need to pay close attention to the contract wording around variations. Some contracts impose time bars. This means that a contractor could lose entitlement to an additional payment arising from a variation if they do not notify it as per the contract. This is quite common in construction contracts. I've put an example here from the FIDIC standard form contract. We will do another video on notifying variations. A quick roundup then. A variation is a change to the contract scope defined in the original contract. Project price should change as the project scope changes. Look out for scope creep. Pay close attention to the wording of your contract. And 5 minutes isn't very long. This topic warrants more, so we'll post more videos around variations on the channel. Okay, so what now? The usual spiel. Leave a comment, let us know your thoughts on the video. What else would you like to know? Can you suggest some topics for some more videos? If you found this video useful, please subscribe because we'll be adding a lot more.